This device isn't a spaceship. It's a time machine. Goes backwards, forwards. It takes us to a place where we ache to go again. It's not called the wheel. It's called the carousel.
It was the best time of our lives.
All right, welcome to the first post-election carousel episode with new DA Nate Hochman. How many times can we make this joke?
Oh man, so many people have made it already. It's so good though.
Yeah. Somebody tell me if my sound is too loud. StreamMate, that's the porn site. StreamYard sucks with sound. So I'm gonna switch soon, but somebody tell me if it's bad. But welcome to the show, Nate, returning guest. So, what was you're a political guy. I think today we can just talk about politics. You're a DC guy. I think one of the more pathetic things is watching all these dorks try and scramble for positions inside the administration. So you can tell us what that looks like. Not you, but
no, of course.
Who don't deserve it. First of all, what was your prediction, and then how did the night of go, in your opinion?
Man, if I'm being totally candid, I would love to say that like I was like 100% white pillar, because that was like a thing, especially like in our circles, in the sort of culture of the online right. Like especially in the last, anyone who's sort of in these circles is very familiar with this. In the last like 5-6 months of the election in particular, it was like a social mandate that you white pill. Right? Anyone who is anything less than 100% sure that Trump was going to win in like, world historic fashion, totally unacceptable. You're going in the crystals, etc. I did like spiritually think Trump was going to win, but because I was going to be so heartbroken, like just devastated if he lost. Like, I mean, it would have ruined, I don't even know. I don't even want to sort of think about it.
I can't even, I was thinking about that too. My wife said to me, she was like, are you going to like be okay if he loses?
I wouldn't have been.
I haven't even thought of that. Like, I don't even,
the thing is, every time it like came into my mind, I was like, man, I can't even think about what it's going to be like, because it would just be so devastating. So there was this sort of like emotional coping mechanism, like preemptive coping mechanism, where I sort of talked myself into the idea that like, it's like there's a million ways Kamala could win. And I think like there were less ways that she could have possibly won than I thought, but she could have won. Like there were ways that she could have won. And so I was kind of like hedging my bets a little bit. I wasn't blackpilling by any stretch of the imagination, but I was certainly hedging my bets. And I was wrong. I was totally wrong. I've never been more happy to be wrong in my life. I happily accept my my prison sentence in the crystals. I deserve it. So
you thought she was going to win?
No, I didn't necessarily think she was going to win. I just thought it was very possible. There are a bunch of like avenues for her to win, right? Because we are, a 50-50 country. Yeah. The Democrats do have a formidable electioneering machine with tons of shenanigans like we saw in 2020, which has for the most part not been totally dismantled. I think I underestimated how much COVID was kind of a one-off for the sheer degree of ballot harvesting and fraud they were able to do in 2020. You just can't do that in a more normal election year. And I might have underestimated my fellow Americans. I thought like more people had sort of fallen for the kind of media psyop stuff than it turns out had. I thought probably like there was a decent chance that Trump was going to manage to squeak by in the Electoral College because of the economy, because of immigration, et cetera. But I thought the media had basically talked half the country into believing that this guy was going to be the worst thing in the world and that you had to vote for Kamala if you're a good person. Turns out they'd talked like 49% of the country into thinking that. But that's a big difference.
See, I was so buried deep in our bubble, and there was a couple things that tipped me off. There was, I read these tablet magazine articles about why Jews are voting for each one, right? And it was like they found a bunch of people on each side, right? And on one side, it was all people who had voted for Dems every single year forever. And they were all insane queer cat ladies who were just like, no, they would never, ever. And on the other side, like 80% of the Jews they found were flipped in either the last election or the one before. And I was like, all right, if that's happening, and it's such a narrow margin anyway, if there's this many people who flipped, and then in my own life, I'm surrounded now by Trump supporting friends. 4 years ago, I was surrounded by 0 Trump supporting friends. I was like, there must have been some kind of shift. So to me, it was like, guaranteed. I was certain. And I predicted before I said it's going to be a landslide night of, and we're going to know night of, and I was right. But I just felt like the writing on the wall was so strong.
And you were totally right. And by the way, like the sort of flipping to Trump, like the new Trump supporter thing, it was real. It was so real. I mean, you see that in the numbers, but you also just see that culturally, it became okay to support Donald Trump, to vote for Donald Trump in a way in 2024 that had no precedent in 2016 or 2020 at all. Radical difference. I think part of what made me nervous is because of all of that. Everything seemed to be going so well for Trump that like a part of me was like, man, it can't be this good. Like I had this like nervous anxiety that it was going to be like a Hillary 2016 thing where like in 2016, everyone on the sort of Hillary bandwagon was so sure that there was no way Donald Trump could win. And they didn't know a single Trump supporter, and everything was going for Hillary. And the big sort of meta narrative was that Hillary was a shoo-in. And they were so sure based on vibes that they didn't notice the polls tightening in the last couple months of the election. It wasn't like something that was on their radar. And the polls were really, really close in the election. Kamala and the RCP average going into election week was like up 0.5 percentage point in Michigan. She was down like 0.3 in Pennsylvania. Like it was, so little difference that they were practically tied. And that plus like everyone around me being like, Trump's going to win. It's going to be a landslide. Like the vibes looking so good. It made me instinctively nervous that there was something we were missing. It turns out in this case, the vibes were right. Like it was a landslide. It was decided on election night. So.
Yeah. Okay. So then how did you feel afterwards?
Amazing. I still like, I can't stop smiling. Like it's just amazing. And everything that's happened since, like, it's like total libtard defeat, total Trump victory. Like everything went about as well as it possibly could have. Like it's tough to imagine it going much better than it has gone. So
yeah, exactly. And now comes the inevitable phase of disappointment, right?
Yeah,
it's
right.
Like,
well, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. No, dude, I just felt so good for the next like 3 days. I still do.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is it's so vindicating, man. It's just so insanely vindicating. Did you start as a right winger? Have you always been a right winger?
No, I was raised. I love my parents, but they're libs. I was raised in Portland, Oregon. Both my parents, they're not like crazy, but they're like, Clinton Democrat types. I think they vote for like Republican for governor sometimes, so they hate Trump, And both their sons turned out to be rabid, frothing at the mouth right wingers. So go figure.
What happens? It's like when there's 2 trans kids.
Well, yeah, it's like that. I mean, but it's also like, we're young white men, right? Like, so you can't not become right wing. I mean, you can, but there has to almost be something like pathologically wrong with you to grow up as a young straight white guy and go to a lefty college campus, grow up in a lefty environment and not be like, this is horrifying. I clearly don't belong here. Whoever's against these people, I'm with them, right? Whichever side these people are on, I'm not on that side. Like that was an experience I had. It's an experience my brother had. I can tell you countless other guys who came from lib families where that's where they ended up. And you saw that in the polls, right? Like Trump got like Ronald Reagan numbers with young people overall. Young men, Gen Z men are like a deep red constituency now. He won them. Biden won them by double digits in 2020. Trump won them by 13 points. Like that's deep red,
So what issues do you think, for the young guys that you're just talking about, and people like you and I, what issues, when you're saying, I just don't want to be that, What are the things that are making you not want to be that?
Yeah. Well, so overall, like 2020, as much as it would be great to like say this was because of this like gigantic, like everyone, 51% of the country became based, like everyone's like super whatever, right? Like it was an economy, immigration, bread and butter issues election, right? Like a substantial, the reason Trump won the popular vote was because things had become so materially bad in the country. Like people understood that things were good under him economically and things were really bad under Biden and Harris. And so they voted for him. So that was like part of the reason people shifted towards Trump was like bread and butter, kitchen table economy issues. And to be fair, like they really didn't like what was happening on the border. I mean, the top two issues going into the election were the economy and immigration. And on both issues, those are like two of the GOP's strongest issues. And this is like the strongest predictor of presidential elections going back, you know, a century. Like since 1948, the party that people trust, that voters trust on whatever issue voters rate as the most important issue going into that election has won every single time except for twice. In the 60s, like they were tied for inflation and LBJ won. And then in like 2000, I think they didn't ask the question or something. Basically every single time since 1948, the guy who voters trust more on the issue that's most important to them wins the election. And so economy and immigration, overwhelmingly people trust Trump more than Biden or Harris. So that's why I think he won. In terms of like young men, though, there is like this much broader kind of meta social cultural story going on, especially, but not exclusively young white men, straight young white men, where they are completely alienated, totally understandably, from the kind of dominant cultural and social and political power centers in American life. And a lot of them are raised like for the first 21 years of their life in these like left-wing meat grinders where they're always the other, they're always the alien, right? They're always the scapegoat. I mean, this isn't a super original or unique point, but it's obviously what's driving this drastic rightward shift with men under 30. Like that, for a substantial portion of them, they have a rational reaction to it, right? Which is like, these people hate me. So I'm against them, you know?
I think it's the trans thing, man.
That's a big part of it.
I honestly feel like without that, that is so important to so mmany people. And what was Trump's, every ad I saw from him in that last little bit of time was trans surgeries for illegals. I mean, that did kind of combine a bunch of them. But that to me was really like, that to me is the one truly, truly unforgivable thing. You know, transing kids is absolutely unacceptable. and anybody who does it belongs in jail, like for
totally,
real. Like you belong in jail like now, you know. And anybody who supports it, anybody who's involved in it in any way is, you know, you're participating in great evil. You know, the total taking advantage of an innocent child. You know, I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't believe that it even exists. And so that to me is so strong, especially for the younger guys. And I think that like they see that and they're just like, fuck this, man. I mean, dude, I grew up with fucking trannies. I hate to, this is weird. I'm a theater kid, super theater kid, ultra far left parents. So I grew up, I knew some. My dad was in plays with some. Like there was a good family friend who was one. I interviewed one once for some prior job. So it's not like this is like some foreign concept to me.
Yeah, same.
I've seen these people my whole life, and they're fucking crazy. They're not okay. They're not like, this is not like a thing we should be encouraging people to do. We should do everything to encourage them not to do that. Yeah. So,
let alone inflicting it on kids, right? I mean,
Jesus Christ.
My like top issue is immigration, but like obviously, I think the trans issue, specifically trans kids, is like so visceral for people that it's like this that emotional... they found this issue where like maybe for the first time in some time you can't propaganda people out of it, right? You can't propaganda people out of feeling the visceral thing that it should make you feel. Like this is an interesting thing, and this is a classic example of like them overstepping their bounds and provoking this backlash, which is now going backwards. Like the country's public opinion on gay marriage has now moved right substantially.
Oh, yeah.
Especially young men. Young men have moved right by double digits on gay marriage because basically what's happening is they're so repulsed by the trans stuff that they're now unraveling the thread and thinking like back to earlier stages in the LGBT movement, being like, I don't really like that either.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
Wait a second. I thought this was just about what you wanted to do in your bedroom.
Right,
Suddenly,
and the
it's
trans
about
thing,
my kids, like what?
Right, and the trans thing like proves that none of it was about
about that. No, and I knew it then, man. I fucking knew it then. I lived in the West Village in New York City, and you know, it was I was such a typical urban professional. All of my friends, they were all these young, smart, you know, white kids, like all good schools, a lot of Ivy League kids, a lot of just, you know, big fancy school type of banker types. And they would just all get excited to go to Pride, like with our group of friends. And I would just be like, am I insane? Like, isn't this obviously bad? Like, they're not just like nice people holding hands, like walking down the street. It's like a horribly surgery guy in a thong twerking with his like dick out on the streets. I'm like, does no one else have some sort of like biblical memory of this? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
but the thing is, religious. Like, you don't even need. Obviously, there are like biblical explanations for why this is degenerate and sinful, but you don't even need. Like, I'm not saying that it's illegitimate or that it shouldn't be, but like you don't actually even need a religious background or a faith background to understand why that. Like, there's a reason that homosexuality has been with, you know, lefties, like they'll find like specific arcane like Amazon cultures or something where like homosexuality is tolerated and be like, see, like, you know, it's a culturally constructed thing. But there's a reason that like
it's
the vast
swans are gay.
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's like, why are we like swans also rape each other?
Swans
so
are
like
trans.
Yeah. Swans also like exclusively have sex via rape. So like I don't really know.
They also eat their children.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe we shouldn't use the animal kingdom as a as our lodestar. But there is a reason that across time, place, context, culture, religion, whatever, most societies, with, you know, notable exceptions like ancient Greece or whatever, have seen fit to suppress homosexuality, right? Because there is this thing that is even beyond like any sort of religious belief. That there's an understanding that this is something that is degenerate, that is deviant, that is deleterious to the social fabric. And the interesting thing about like what I was saying earlier about the trans thing is like the people have this visceral reaction to homosexuality too. Like there's these really interesting studies showing that if you show a young man, a young straight man, presumably, there's a bunch of studies, you can look them up, a picture of two men kissing, they have a stronger disgust reaction than if they saw a cockroach. Right now, I'm going to get myself in trouble. I'm not like comparing the two things, obviously, right?
This is the Jew. Oh, are you talking about Jews? The cockroach?
Yeah, no, well, no, God, no, of course not.
No, I'm just saying, I think this thing of the disgust cockroach thing, this was a big Hitler thing, wasn't it? I'm not saying you're saying this.
I don't know.
I'm just saying this whole like thing.
Now you're
like,
getting me in even more
trouble.
I'm
not saying you're saying this at all.
Yeah,
Nate is not saying this. All I'm saying is when you start doing the cockroach thing, people immediately
sure. The point is like when you see a cockroach, you have a disgust response, right? And if you show young men a picture of two men kissing, there's all these studies showing they have an even stronger disgust response, which shows that there's this like deeply programmed or not programmed, deeply ingrained disgust response.
It's not some great mystery. It's just don't put your dick in that hole, put it in the other fuking hole, man.
Like, and it viscerally,
right?
For a guy, it viscerally, you think about it, you're like, ew, right? That like is that grosses you out. But the thing is, like the what the left and the kind of larger kind of propaganda machine was extraordinarily successful at is basically talking people out of that instinct, right?
Yes.
With gay marriage, if you look at the sort of public opinion poll, this gigantic swing, it was not organic. It was the result of this decades-long, enormously well-funded propaganda effort.
Very successful,
extremely successful, and they ruined it with the trans thing, right? That's why you're seeing like public opinion move right on gay marriage now. Is all of a sudden it became like very viscerally, visually clear what all of this was about, and it wasn't like white picket fence. They're just like us, like, you know, 2.5 kids, like whatever, right? Like two nice, well-cut guys. It's like the shit you see at Pride Parade, right? Like that's what it is. And people are realizing that now because of the trans thing. So
yeah. Totally. I think you're right. They did that. They ruined it with that. That's how they destroyed it. But they had to, this is again the thing about progressivism, right? Is that it needs constant new, it's like capitalism. It has to grow. And if it stops growing, it dies. So it's like once they say, oh, we won, they can't motivate anybody anymore. So they had to find the next dragon to slay, which was the trans thing. And it's like the most insane thing in the entire world. Okay, so what other issues? I mean, what do you think will be the left's? So, I had a little bit of a viral piece listening to Pod Save America afterwards, listening to their digest of it, which I did just for pure entertainment. And everybody's kind of lamenting the fact that they're not really they're not learning, right? Which I don't think you can necessarily totally blame them. It is brand new. I'm sure they will learn over time. But what do you think is going to be their move? How are they going to pivot from here? What is going to be their overall sort of strategy to like retake the country?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So one sort of cope explanation, which isn't actually totally wrong, you hear from a lot of sort of like Biden-Harris apologists, is like every incumbent across the Western world was getting killed because of inflation. It's been like a bad few years for incumbents. Inflation is just like a political killer. Nobody can survive it. There's no way she could have lost, or she could have won. Sorry. Right. And like, it's true. Like inflation is horrible for incumbent politicians. And that like clearly played a part in why that, and the kind of economic malaise more broadly played a part in why people just weren't going to vote for Democrats this cycle. But it's also true that like quote unquote wokeness and all of its sort of attendant things, right? Like open border stuff, the trans issue, the kind of smarmy, school marmy, nanny state, like language policing stuff. Like people don't like that stuff. They do not like it. And they don't like it for aesthetic reasons, but they also don't like it like for substantive reasons. Like people really do not want you to trans their kids, right? That's not like a messaging issue, right? It's not the kind of thing that you can like, that's the problem with the way they're sort of digesting a lot of this. Is like, well, clearly Democratic messaging just wasn't getting through on this issue. It's like, no, you can't message that issue in a way that will make people like it. They just don't like it, right? As long as you hold that issue or hold that position on that issue, you're fucked. Yeah, like it's just not going to happen.
It's third rail. But that's what's so interesting, because it's like the one they can't, they're willing to give up Israel. As we've seen, that guy just went and said we should have messaged Gaza stronger. And that's how we would have won Dearborn. That's how we won blah, blah, blah. One of these Pod Save America guys. They're willing to lose Israel before they lose trans, which is why it's mind blowing. Like Israel's obviously going to fuck you. Obviously they're going to come for you. You know, they're going to fucking come for you. That's probably why they lost, but they're willing to do that, but they're not willing to they can't even allow into their minds maybe the trans thing is a bad idea, right? It's like, why?
Yeah. Well, the Israel thing is like there actually is like a mass political constituency for like anti-Israel politics, right? Like there's a generational shift.
Yeah, right.
And those are the people who are like really anti-Israel are outside of like Arab Muslims in Michigan. Like they are like the most politically active kind of like activist foot soldiers in the progressive base, right? So they have like outsized power in sort of the Democratic Party constituency. And if those guys are like demotivated, even if it's like a portion of them that are demotivated, like that really hurts the Democratic base, right? It would be like if the Republican Party sold out on, I can't really think of like a comparable issue, like an issue that like really mattered to or their sort of activist base. Like it would be an issue for them. So, and there's a broader generational shift on Israel too. Like even younger conservatives are like less stoked about Israel.
They're completely fucked. They're utterly.
So yeah, that's a whole other issue. But they have like a closing time window. Israel does, where they can like really take advantage of like the blank check support they get from the U.S. But the trans stuff is like I was saying this on Twitter the other day. The reason I'm skeptical to an extent of the like we're past peak woke stuff, you see that from some like sort of conservative influences, like the past peak woke thing, like wokeness like peaked in like 2021 or 2020 or whatever, and now we're past it, and you're like seeing this recession. And that's true in some places. Like you have seen an anti-DEI backlash. You have seen like some paring back of the sort of aesthetic radicalism of wokeness. Like that's true. But substantively, we're not past peak woke at all. And I think the reason that we probably won't be for some time is like the Democratic Party is structurally incapable, and the institutional left is structurally incapable of really changing its positions or moderating on these things, right? Like, I'm sorry, you spent the last decade like raising a generation of like militant gay race communist like soldiers who to believe that like gender identity or gender fluidity is like an identity, and to deny gender fluidity is to commit genocide. Like, how do you moderate on genocide, right? Like, you can't. There's only one acceptable position on genocide, and you can't like make compromises for political purposes. Like, it's morally unacceptable to the people who are kind of like the energetic Democratic base now. So I don't know how they run away from that, right? They can de-emphasize it, but can they say like, okay, we're on board with banning sex changes for minors now? I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah. Okay, so what do they do? What is their move? What's their positive strategy?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm curious what you think. I don't really know. I think they're kind of like the whole like Democrats in disarray thing is like a meme, right? Like them in disarray. I think they really are in serious disarray right now. And it depends like what the sort of, right now you're at like the beginning finger pointing phases, right? Where like every faction in the party is like pointing fingers at the other faction saying like, we didn't do anything wrong. It was your fault. So it'll be interesting over the course of the next 3 to 6 months to watch as a sort of consensus forms in lefty media, in Democratic Party activist circles, in the NGOs, et cetera, about like why they lost. Because you see a lot of competing theses right now about why they lost. And whatever the thesis is of like why they lost is what's going to define what they do next. Because you see different people with very different explanations. You see a lot of people saying Harris did nothing wrong. Like there's nothing she could have done better. It was already baked into the cake, basically, that like they were going to lose because of inflation or whatever. And I think there's like an element of truth to that. Not that she did nothing wrong, but that they were always going to lose. But I also think if that's their takeaway, like they are fucked for a while because they did a lot wrong. And if they can't actually understand that, they're going to keep doing those same wrong things.
Yeah. So my overall feeling is they're going to, what are they going to do? Strategically, what are they going to do? Here's the rumblings that I'm seeing. I'm seeing this. So remember, they tried to go, I think that they're going to learn. I had Scott Greer on here. It's great. And he has this thing about FanDuel Americans.
I think I've like seen vaguely that.
So FanDuel Americans is like this crop of dudes who are like, they're not political. They're kind of, they should be right wing, but they've been so beat down, right? And they're vaping weed. They're doing FanDuel all day. You know, they're so distracted that they're like offended by politics at all, right? Like they're an ad will come on and they'll just like look like, ugh, like I'm disgusted. Like keep this shit away from me. You know what I'm saying? I think that's going to be their move. I think that like Bud Light was the peak of like trying to sow wokeness into their control, right? And they lost, and now they lost this. I think now they're going to pivot to the politics of mass distraction. So it'll be like a lot about weed. It'll be a lot about like porn. It'll be like freedom, bro. Like these conservatives want to take away your, you know, they did a little bit of that, but they didn't really, you know, they still were kind of, I mean, the Kamala campaign was such a joke. They didn't have any plan. But I think that they're going to move to this like politics of mass distraction thing. Like, oh, you care? Like, ew. Like, yeah, like gross. Like, yeah, you care about politics? Like, you're a dork. You know, I think that that's kind of like what they're going to do.
I think that's like a very plausible explanation. I mean, you saw the Harris campaign like hone in on some of this in like the last couple months, right? You saw that like there's that infamous like Republican congressman in your bedroom ad where like he was coming in. There's a guy like jacking off or something, and he's like comes in, he's like, you can't jack off anymore, right? Like, and then there was like a series, right? They had another one coming in where like the condom broke, and the guy came in, and she was like, I have to take Plan B, and the guy was like, no, you can't take Plan B. Like really cringy, like off-putting stuff in its own sense. But like that is demonstrative in its own sort of clumsy, cringy way of like the impulse you're describing, right? Where they're trying to hone in on like sort of the apolitical. I mean, maybe that's the new kind of like growing silent majorities, like people who just don't like politics. And the Republicans sort of implicitly were able to, in many ways, position themselves as like the anti-political party, for better or for worse this time. Whereas like the Dems are the ones who want to inject politics into everything. And we're the ones who just want to make stuff normal again. Right?
Yes.
And the Democrats do have like a lane to try to make that argument. I don't know if it'll be successful, but that like those ads were like a version of that argument that you're describing, where it's like we're the ones who just want to like make everything chill again and like not make it have to be about politics.
Like don't think about politics. They even started saying that towards the end of the campaign, and I was like, that's actually kind of a scary message. Yeah, and I'm glad they didn't get it together enough to actually run with that, because like there are things like get politics. Aren't you sick of thinking about this? Like that's going to be their thing. Like just stop thinking about it. Turn your brain off. Don't worry. You know, like stop, you know, I think that's going to be their thing.
Waltz did this shtick, and Waltz Waltz was like their idea of like the guy that you want for that kind of stuff. In reality, he wasn't the guy that you want for that kind of stuff, but he was like the Democratic Party, like activist consultant idea of like the kind of like relatable uncle, even though he like creeped out most people, at least most people in our circles. But like he would do this shtick on the stump where he's like, you know, just a down home folksy guy. And he would be like, I'm just so tired of, you know, having to argue with my family about politics at Thanksgiving. Aren't you tired of having to argue about politics with your Thanksgiving family, Christmas table, whatever thing? Like, and it's like, first of all, like, fuck you. Like you guys were the ones doing that, right? Like you guys were the ones like not allowing people, like relatives who like didn't have their booster shot to come to Christmas, like that kind of stuff. But
wait. Oh, somebody just said this in the comments. No, we had a bunch of comments, but somebody just said exactly what you're saying. He said, Robert Weisenfeld, you know, I don't know, guys. They're the ones politicizing everything from wearing a mask in the grocery store to the garbage books at the local library.
Obviously true.
Right.
Obviously
but that's what we're saying. We're saying that they're going to now get off that train. There's something really weird going on with the NFL. And I've said this from the moment Kelsey and Taylor got together. I wrote a big piece about it called Chihuahua Swims Right. And they are like, for real, they like gave hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to the NFL to try to like get back in the good graces of like the normal American man. And they've been running weird propaganda. That whole Eminem video that was like NFL times Bud Light times Eminem, and then he's at the draft, right? Like that is what we're talking about. It's like politics of mass distraction, where they're moving the don't be racist off the field. It doesn't say like fight racism anymore, and now it's just saying just forget about, you know, just drink Bud Light. Do FanDuel, like don't think about politics. That's what I think that they're going to do.
And that is like clearly the messaging strategy they're going to take. The question is like, can they do that in a convincing way? Because again, structurally, I don't think the Democratic Party is capable, at least as it's currently constituted, of like actually doing that, right? Like the mandates, the demands of their like rabid base, of the progressive activists, of the media, of all these other like powerful lefty institutions that basically control and run the Democratic Party, is the exact opposite of that. They want to like be nanny statists. They want to like hound people for XYZ offense against progressivism, right? They want to constantly have more control of your life so that they can socially engineer you in X direction that you don't necessarily want to go. Like that is what progressivism is. And like the idea that the Democratic Party is not going to become a platform for advancing progressivism is just sort of impossible to imagine. It would require like flouting too many powerful institutions that basically are the Democratic Party. So they'll do the messaging and maybe it'll convince some people, and maybe they'll sort of be able to take some people back on like porn or weed or abortion or Plan B or whatever. Right. But like they still are going to have that core impulse, which is what repulsed people so much about them in the first place.
They might be fucked, man. They might be fucked. They might be fucked because the Longhouse can't really. Again, I'm sorry. I hate the word Longhouse. We got to move past this as well. But there's no other word for the feminized workplace, right? And she was a diversity golem. She was a golem of their own creation, and her team couldn't get it together. They couldn't answer questions. They completely screwed it up. And the entire network of them is full of these diversity golems. It's full of these managerial, all-female teams. And it's just like, I don't know if they can, where are they going to get white guys from? Where are they going to get competent men from? They've bled all the competent men out of everything. It's like Dime Square. You guys chased us all away. It's like if you only have gays and trannies and women around, and you are like angry at a guy, it's like they're going to all just leave. And so I just don't even know, who do they have? I can't think of one person.
They're like
Newsom,
straight
right?
white guy. Yeah, well, Newsom is actually a threat, I think, for the reasons that you were just saying. Like, he is this like good-looking, like pretty clearly straight. I think maybe that's controversial. I think it's pretty clear, like beautiful family, like straight white guy, like charismatic. Like he's actually like looks like a kind of politician. He doesn't look like somebody who is like picked for political power who has no actual political appeal. Like their version outside of Newsom, though, their version of like, here's like our straight white guy who like seems like a down home, folksy middle American is like Tim Walz, right? Like, you remember when Tim Walz was picked, they had all of these like fawning think pieces of like Tim Walz like envisions like a different kind of like a healthier kind of masculinity, right? It's like that's why guys don't like him, right? Like the reason that you like him and that you think that his like masculinity is great and is totally unthreatening is precisely why he strikes so many people as this like pathetic, weird guy.
Because they're
like
all of you should cut your dick off,
right.
Like that's every one of you. And then it's like, all right, well, you're wondering why Andrew Tate, Andrew Tate isn't particularly, I actually kind of like him, but it's not like he's like got the greatest content in the world. It's just that he simply doesn't take shit. He just is like, no, F you,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, the reason young guys like guys like that is not because they like are like Andrew Tate or whatever. It's because there is this like deep and suppressed yearning for somebody to just be like, fuck you, right? Some guy who's like clearly a guy to just be like, fuck all of that, fuck you. And so they'll go for a guy like Andrew Tate who like might be like over the top on some stuff because the alternative is Tim Walz. Right?
Yeah.
And who wants to be like Tim Walz when they grow up? Nobody.
Yeah, exactly. No guy wants that. And that's why we have the young men. Hey, 2,000 people on the stream. Not bad. I don't think I think they kind of inflate the numbers here. But
oh, really?
That's what
I'm supposed to say that publicly on the stream.
That's what it says. So, all right. We get a lot of comments, though. You're very popular, Nate. Okay, so let's talk about staffing this administration. The most annoying thing for me to watch is all these supposedly cool Twitter anons. Not people like you, Nate. You're a politics guy. You're a policy guy. You should be the one who is going in the administration of anybody.
Thank you.
I'm saying all these fucking frogs who are like gatekeeping, you know who you fucking are. And then they'll go, I'm going to be in the administration as a blah, blah, and I'm going to pick the people. And I'm going to say, you have to be a woman or you have to be nice. And if you're not nice, and it's like, fuck off, man. Like,
wait. The frogs are saying they're going to pick like DEI candidates?
I think that there's this network, the counter elite, right, that many of us are involved in is like, this is what Chris Brunette got so pissed about, right? Not that I'm on his side, but I'm just saying, like, they form this counter elite and then suddenly we've got, Fox News too. It's like there's no, we're not really, what are we really doing that's different? The values are just the same because people are getting fed into DC. The DC system is what it is. And so they're going to play by DC's rules. They're not going to go in and wreck shop. They're just going to go in and be the new outer party, right? That's like pretty much what they're doing. That's why we really need guys like you, Nate, because you're conscious of all this. You're like, you see the game for what it is, I think. Whereas a lot of these people, they've been anonymous or they've been kind of super outsiders. They're so excited to get a little bit of power that they're just going to get flipped. Look, it's like Rufo and, I mean, look, again, I'm not criticizing Rufo. I like Rufo, but we saw what happened with him hiring a porn star and then hiring even Brunette himself. It's like they're liable to make mistakes because I think they're getting sucked into the vacuum. And unless they really keep their principles, they're just going to become the new outer party because that's just how DC works. So how are you seeing this administration being staffed? Well, how's it going to go different from last time, et cetera?
Yeah, so I got to be obviously like careful about,
of course,
we're in the early
I don't mean to be
stages.
talking stuff about people.
That's fine. I'll say what I can say. But like, so we're in like the early machinations of all that stuff, right? And there's the kind of stuff where there's like a lot of stuff happening behind the scenes, and there'll be more news about XYZ thing in like a week or in 2 weeks, et cetera. But thus far, at least based on the picks that have publicly been made, like things are looking much better than last time. And of course, there are concerns about like the reason Trump got undermined like for the entire presidency last time is because he got in there as an outsider, which is what everyone wanted, understandably. But the downside of being an outsider is like you don't know who's on your side in DC. You don't totally know how the game works. You don't know who to trust, all of that stuff, right? And the like smart loyalists who were like hardcore MAGA guys in the interim between the first term and what is now going to be the second term understood that was the fundamental problem, that personnel is going to be policy, and devoted an enormous amount of time and resources to trying to put together a plan to have that not happen again. So there are like real concerns, obviously, about the wrong people getting in the wrong places, like all that kind of stuff. And, depending who you talk to in DC, some people are really optimistic about it. Some people are more skeptical or cautious. There's also like, whenever you ask someone, I've learned this the hard way in some cases, because I've like internalized something that somebody told me as truth. And then you realize that like there was a motivation for them telling you this stuff. Like sometimes there's just so much factionalism in DC that like somebody will tell you, oh man, the staffing is going to be terrible this time around. And you realize it's because like they didn't get a job, or they got passed over or whatever.
Of course.
So you got to take everything you hear with a grain of salt.
Yeah, definitely.
But like the fact that like Stephen Miller is like right there with him and is going to be in the admin, like that's huge, right? The fact like Tom Homan, like his borders are, I mean, couldn't ask for a better. Have you seen this guy, Tom Homan?
Yeah. So I just saw that. He was
the guy, he went viral like a few weeks ago because there was a 60-minute interview. I don't know if it happened a few weeks ago, if it happened earlier, where they were like, the lady was like pressing him. She's some lib journalist. And she was like, is there a way to do mass deportations without separating them from their family? And he's like, yeah, you can deport the whole family. So like, that's the guy who's going to be the border czar, right? And
I did see this guy. Oh yeah. He's cool. Yeah.
He had this barn burner speech at the RNC where he's like, if you're an illegal alien, start packing your bags now, because like you're going home, right? Like he's hardcore. So those are the kinds of guys we're seeing so far. And that is a huge improvement from the guys who were in positions like that last time. The question is like, who's to be the cabinet position, right? Like who's going to be Secretary of State, who's going to be Secretary of Defense, like that kind of stuff, commerce. Like there's a lot of people kind of waiting with bated breath right now. Because once you start seeing the cabinet picks, then you're going to know for sure what kind of administration this is going to look like. But like Trump coming out the other day and being like, I'm not hiring Mike Pompeo or Nikki Haley, like that was huge. That demonstrates a serious effort to course correct from last time. So it's not going to be
Kushner,
perfect,
right? No Jared Kushner also.
We'll see, right? But it's not going to be perfect, right? And there's going to be people online who it's like not pure enough for them, right? Like they're going to be people somewhere that are not like good, that are not up to code. That's just what staffing administration is like. But thus far, like the fact that the people around Trump seem to be cognizant of like, this is the problem you need to fix to do real stuff this time. Like that's huge, because that's the opposite of what happened last time.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So what is going to be the first thing he does? Oh, he did appoint. So he did appoint Tom Homan as border czar.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Wow. Me and magic. Oh, I thought you said he was, he was going for that. So
no, yeah, he's there.
What's going to be the first thing that happens? I personally, people are going to be very offended by this. I personally would love to this is going to sound really bad, but what's the deal with deportation? Or is there going to be like local deportation initiatives? How's this going to actually work? I would love to embed with a deportation squad myself for journalistic reasons. No, but actually just because I'd want to do it. So like how, somebody, a tranny from Palestine asks, you're happy about a fascist being a border czar? How do we answer this question?
No, disavow.
No,
We disavow fascism.
Disavow
this is just about the
fascism
rule of
in
law.
every way,
Yeah.
Joanne. Anyway, so I've never had a stream touch the other sphere. So welcome all of you people who hate us. But okay, so yeah, how's the actual deportation going to work? Because I mean, people forget. What, Clinton deported 12 million people? So it's like clearly this was happening already. So, and look, this is even less than that. So how's this going to actually go?
Yeah, well, if you make it through every single illegal that's come in under Biden, it would be more than that, right? But the thing is, like, when you start doing real mass deportations en masse, like people made fun of Mitt Romney, of all people, for talking about self-deportations. Like that actually does happen. That actually, once you start deporting people en masse and you start making it harder for businesses to hire illegals, people leave. Like they leave in substantial numbers. You don't actually have to deport every single illegal who came into the country. A lot of them will leave once you kind of send the signal that like party's over, right? And yeah, like you said, like deportations, even deportations at scale, are not like a radical new concept. Like you have, like Obama, I think, deported 3 million illegals like over his 2 terms, which is pretty substantial. Clinton had like Operation Gatekeeper, I think it was called. Both Clinton and Bush deployed the National Guard to militarize the border. Like there's a history of this. And the biggest like mass deportation force in American history that people talk about is Operation Wetback, which is now, of course, like a
You can't even say it. You're not
name
even
you
allowed to
can't
say
say.
the name of it.
But that was Eisenhower, right? He was
right.
by all accounts, like a relatively moderate Republican.
It's amazing they called it that.
But what happened was like over the course of the last few years, before he came in, they had something like 3 million illegals cross the border, which at the time, with a smaller population, big deal. And the problem was that like the people who were down like in places like Texas and Southern California were all corrupt. Like all the border officials were getting paid off because you had ranchers and farmers who were hiring these guys and paying them like half the wage that they paid Americans. And they were friends with the local officials or whatever. So Eisenhower comes in, he puts his buddy from West Point, a general, in charge. The general clears out all of the corrupt officials who like weren't enforcing the law. He like relocates them to other departments. And then they carry out this remarkable operation. The Border Patrol at the time had 1,000 Border Patrol agents. Now it's 21,000. And with 750 Border Patrol agents, they deported like 1.1 million illegals over the course of like 5 or 6 months. And what you saw, like this is the self-deportation thing, is so you had 750 agents, basically they came up through like California and Arizona, and then they expanded to Nevada and Texas. And they're like, they comb through like the fields, right? Like literally going through these big fields and just like plucking people out and being like, you got to go, you got to go, you got to go, you got to go. And in the first like month, they deported or they caught like 50,000 illegals. And at the same time, over that period of time, 488,000 illegals left for fear of being caught and deported, right? So you only have to catch, in that case, like 50,000 illegals, and 488,000 will leave in the space of a month with 750 Border Patrol agents with far less sophisticated technology. Now we do have a lot more illegals in the country, but we have 21,000 Border Patrol agents, far, far more sophisticated infrastructure, security technology, reconnaissance technology, et cetera, like enforcement tech. It is a very doable task if you have the political will to do it. The fight is going to be if you have the right people in place who actually want to do this, the fight's going to be like against the media, right? Like it's going to be the propaganda fight, because the second you start deporting people, the media is going to find the sob story. The grandma who got separated from her kids and couldn't take care of them, and that's going to be like front page news for months. Like that's the fight that really matters.
Migra. I
Something
remember
like that.
I was propagandized as a young man too, watching, in Spanish class we had like videos we watched in Spanish class, and it was like the whole premise was that there was a family running from the evil immigration fascists who were trying to kick them out. Yeah, well, hey, don't break the law. You know what else breaks up families is breaking the law.
True.
And you have to have borders. Sorry, we have to have borders. There's just no other way. A country has to have borders. As I learned from you, we shut the border basically from about 1920 to 1965. Isn't that right?
That's right. Yeah, you had like very close to no net immigration for like a generation after Ellis Island. Everyone always talks about the Ellis Island era, like to defend mass migration. They're like, oh, we're built on immigrants because of Ellis Island. And it's like, yeah, regardless of what you think of Ellis Island, like then we shut everything down, legal and illegal immigration, where you basically had a generation for people to kind of like absorb into the fabric of the pre-existing culture. So at the very least, if you're saying like Ellis Island is the model, like, well, we've had more people come in to the country now than we had come in over the course of the Ellis Island era. Like, so the next step at the very least is like to totally shut down immigration. That's the way we recovered from what happened on Ellis Island.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and then that was repealed in the 60s with Hart-Celler, right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. 1965 Immigration Act, which caused all kinds of problems for a variety of different reasons. But one was that like it just drastically spiked up immigration, and you were getting immigration from very different places than you got during the Ellis Island era, from places that were much more different than like the pre-existing population in America.
Yeah. Okay. So what's going to happen with culture? Let's talk about culture. So, how do we think that this is going to go with regard to like, okay, I'm wearing a MAGA hat. I've been wearing it around. You're seeing MAGA hats everywhere. And, there was the Beverly Hills thing. That was a little misleading for reasons I can explain. But, and then, Manhattan, and it's cool. And, I had a party here, competing with Peter Thiel's party. And we had like 100 people there, man. And it's girls wearing the hats, and this is now cool. So where culturally do you think we're gonna go from here? Are we gonna finally get our right wing art that we've been waiting for? We're gonna have right wing sitcoms.
Well, I don't know. Like, so the art thing. This is obviously something that you pay a lot of attention to and have written a lot and thought a lot about. Like, that is like a generational project, right? Like the right doesn't have artists. The left has relative hegemony over art. And now the left like can't really make good art for the most part anymore because of what the left is. So there's this gaping hole that the right could fill if we had people who are capable of thinking artistically. Culturally though, like for young men, like young male culture is implicitly or explicitly right-wing now, right? Like the guys they listen to, the jokes they make, the media they consume, like the podcasts, etc., like everything that like apolitical young men, like the environment they swim in is implicitly or explicitly right wing, like Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, like, etc. Like that's something I experienced in college. Like it was the way that like the rightward shift among young men is real is that it was happening with apolitical young men, right? Like that it wasn't just guys who like really paid attention to politics. It was like normie, like frat bros at like a party in college, right? Like they were like basically right wing. So that is like a real sustained cultural shift that's going to have a seismic implications for not just like electoral politics, but like American culture in general over the course of the next couple of decades. Young women, I don't really know. Because like young women are moving left. I mean, the interesting thing is like the young female vote did move right in this election, substantially less than the young male vote, and it was still deep blue. But I think they moved like 5 points right from where they were in 2020. So they didn't actually keep moving left. They moved right a little bit too. The question is just like they're still way like quadruple, like 20, 30, 40 points to the left, depending on the issue of young men. So like, how does that conflict, that lack of proximity to one another ideologically, affect the culture? I don't know. But it's this weird kind of divergence that you're seeing in my generation politically. So I don't know.
It's going to be weird to see what happens. I'm already like, now that I'm like seeing this, my inherent like contrarianism is just immediately being like, oh, like, do we really want, all this kind of like right wingishness in culture? Of course we do. And we need it. But it's like, it's going to be funny to see what happens. I mean, what I'm hoping, is cancel culture going to be over? Like, we basically had a decade of McCarthyism, especially in the creative spheres. We basically had McCarthyism for a decade. And so is that now over? Can like a Trump supporter now get up and be honest about being a Trump supporter? Do you think?
No, not really. Like, it is clearly receding, right? Like, where it was in the first Trump administration and even in like the Biden administration, like, it's not that bad anymore. And it's certainly like on the right, it's not that bad anymore. Like, the right has started to develop like antibodies, where there was a period of time, like, it was sort of still an issue when I first came into the movement, where like, if you were on the right and like some lefty outlet like engineered a hit job on you, like the right would excise you, right? Like, they would basically follow the commands of like, so the media and the left got to control the contours of like what the right was and what the right wasn't. You still see some of that depending on the institution, but it is substantially lessened. And the right's sort of patience and tolerance for that kind of stuff is substantially lessened as well. On the left, like, I do think you have seen like an opening of the horizons of political possibility, where you do have a wider range of what you can be and say and believe in like mainstream institutions. But like, it's also obviously true that all these institutions are still left wing and do not have tolerance for any manner of right wing views. And people, like, I don't know about people getting fired as much for like an errant tweet, although sometimes I'm sure that'll happen. But it's more like, because they're left wing, it imposes like a sort of self-censorship regime on people who are right wing within the institution. That's certainly true on college campuses. It's also true at like big outlets like the New York Times. Like, that's still very much a factor, and I think probably will be for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's going to be really weird to watch them like awkwardly try to integrate people. I think they've already done this, and it's like, it's going to get really gross, man. I think this kind of takes us back to where we just were with this politics of distraction. Like, did you see Twisters?
Twisters? Maybe. No.
Yeah, so Twisters was this movie that just came out, and it's like, they're clearly trying to not be woke. They have somebody telling them, don't be woke, and let's celebrate the middle of the country. So it's kind of like about, the glory of the not even the Midwest, like the vague West. There's rodeos. And so it must be like Oklahoma or something, Kansas. Are there rodeos in Kansas? I don't know.
I don't know. I've never been to Kansas.
Anyway, so, and it's just this really gross, fake, like, it's just this like sort of based Americanerness enacted by gay dudes kind of thing, and it's like, I think that's what we're going to get. We're going to get a lot of like celebrating America by like the cast of Rent. It'll be like, I'm just an ordinary guy, like it's going to be a lot of really gross, saccharine, like middle America celebration type of shit.
I mean, it's interesting. Like, that's what you saw the Democrats try to do. Like, I mean, like what I was saying on Twitter, like, structurally, I don't think the Democratic Party can really de-woke themselves. Like, structurally, I don't think they can really abandon their core commitments to these issues. Yeah. What you are going to see in this like rightward shift that the Democratic Party is going to try to undertake, which they're convinced is just like a messaging issue, is like a shift in the aesthetic, right? Like, the DNC this year was like hardcore Americana. Like, they had country music and they were like draped out in American flags, and everyone made a point of being like, I love America so much, right? But it's like extraordinarily fake and shallow, because they don't love America. They hate America, and they want to change everything about it. And they can't actually tell you like what substantively like they love about America, except for this like cheesy, shallow, aspirational, like Obama, I love what America can be. I love the promise of America. I love the dream of what America could be, right? Like our founding principles were like a promise, and we've never lived up to that promise, but maybe someday we could. Like, it's this very ephemeral stuff where you like drill below the surface and you realize their patriotism is like, I don't actually like anything about America as it exists. I like vaguely the possibility that America could be something I materially like in the future, right? Like, that's the best that they can do in terms of like patriotism, Americanism, etc. And they can't actually let themselves do any more than that, because it would be a betrayal of their core political commitments. So like when the Democratic Party shifts right and the left shifts right, like you're going to see a lot more of that, which is honestly like way more annoying and aggravating than them just honestly telling you, like they did in 2020, like, fuck America, it's awful, it's evil, we want to burn it down and rebuild something in our image. Like, that's much more honest, and at least you can have like an honest interchange than this like fake pretense of patriotism that is fraudulent to anyone who's actually listening to what they're saying.
Right. So it really does bring up like this question of what do they believe in? What are they going to believe in? Because they had this strategy for a very long time that was balkanize and appeal, right? They were the numbers guys. In a way, they brought like sabermetrics to politics, right? They figured out, okay, this coalition cares about this. This coalition cares about this. This coalition cares about this. Let's signal to each one of those and then bundle them together, and that's how we win. Right? It was very cynical because they didn't actually believe any of the shit they were saying. But if you look at, I always remember Hillary's campaign website was the first time you ever saw, it wasn't just Americans. It was Black Americans, gay Americans, women, working class. They break it all up, they signal, and then they pull them together. Trump completely blew that all up by not doing that at all. He said, no, I'm not going to signal to anybody. I'm just going to say exactly what I want. I'm going to be a leader. I'm going to be authentic. And that completely destroyed them, right? So that balkanized approach kind of works when you're signaling towards freedom. And you're saying, oh, well, we want you to be free, and we want you to be free, and we want you to be more free. We want you all to be more free, to do what you want. But as we've learned, they can't say that freedom is a principle, because they don't believe in freedom for white guys. They believe in the Civil Rights Act, right? The Civil Rights Act destroyed, if we read the fantastic Age of Entitlement, the Civil Rights Act essentially destroyed the American dream in the sense that it stopped making you able to assemble in the decentralized manner that you want to assemble. And that's what America really is about. So until we repeal the Civil Rights Act, we're not going to get America back for real. But they, like, I just can't think of, like, what is going to be, because, yeah, they can say we want freedom, 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 but now they've awakened white guys and white people to being their own group with their own freedom. And it's like, okay, well, you can't just have a bunch of protected classes and then the white people or the white Christians are the only non-protected class, and you can just shit on us all day. It's just not workable. You can't do that forever. So they're going to have to come up with some new idea that's going to have to be their narrative. And I don't know what that could be.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, like, they were banking very explicitly in many cases for like decades on like, well, eventually we don't have to worry about like winning the votes of white people anymore, because like there just won't be enough of them left to have like a substantial enough electorate to overcome our sort of coalition of the ascendant. What they found out with Trump and then subsequently in 2024 is like, that's not actually true. Like, the electorate is still like 70% white. And if you run on being the party that like absolutely despises white people for like a decade, eventually white people are going to be like, nah, some of us will vote for you, but like most of us won't. But the other thing is, like, I think they won Hispanic men outright. I think they won like 46% of the Hispanic vote in total. Like, you get these other groups of people who are not like white, and they are also repulsed by like various other aspects of the sort of modern lefty constituent service, right? Like turns out like Hispanic guys like don't like the trans stuff either, right? Like and want to be able to afford their groceries. Like so the entire kind of like coalitional theory of the electorate is breaking down because the demands of certain coalitions in the electorate are increasingly bumping up against the demands of the interests of other coalitions of the electorate, right? So you go super hard on like the progressive base or like the LGBT stuff or whatever, right? Like other groups like working class Hispanic guys are going to be like, I'm out, right? So with Trump in 2016, it was just like you can hold them together by being the party that's running against like white supremacy or whatever. In 2024, you can't even do that anymore because you can't do so again, like I don't know where they go from there, but increasingly like the logic of their coalition, at least for now, doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, it does. Well, right. At least they can't totally bring that coalition together because they don't. They don't want religious freedom for these people that they say they want.
Right.
Religious freedom for. They want those people to come in and then, be transed to this this new thing. So, all right. So what's going to go on in terms of the conservative media ecosystem, which you're a part of? You're at a think tank, to 2100, America 2100. So how do you see that going? What do you think is going to happen with conservative media? I know we talked about conservative culture, but I'm saying like the media itself. Yeah.
I mean, what happens on both the right and the left in the kind of Beltway is when someone from our side becomes president, like it totally changes the sort of gravitational relationship of the entire like movement, right? Where like the presidency, the administration becomes like the sun and everything else revolves around it, right? When you're out, it's a much more kind of decentralized, everyone doing their own thing situation. When someone, at least someone like Trump, who's like aligned with us, is in, like everything, obviously we're still doing our own thing. We still have our own sort of priorities, but like everything is sort of has a contingent relationship to what's going on in the Trump administration. So I think like, who knows what happens with like conservative media writ large. And a lot of conservative media is just like not very good, which is a problem. You do have a bunch of like new media ventures and some legacy ventures that have been remade that are doing really good work. But you have a lot of slop too, to be perfectly honest. But like the stuff that actually like interesting people in conservative media, I imagine are going to be very closely watching what happens in the Trump admin. And I think the fights are going to get pretty hot pretty quick here. So if conservative media is doing its job, it's going to be really invested in covering and explaining that stuff.
Well, so talk more about that Beltway change. What changes in DC? What's the feeling?
Well, first of all, DC like demographically literally changes. Like people move in and people move out. Navy Yard, which is where I lived the last time I was in DC, which is like the Republican neighborhood in DC. By Republican neighborhood in DC, it's like 20% Republican, right? But its vote for Trump doubled from like 2016 to 2020 because that's like where all the Republican staffers moved in. So like literally the city itself becomes more Republican or more Democrat depending on the situation. But just in general, like if you're a think tank, if you're an advocacy group, if you're a media outlet, like your avenue on your platform and your kind of vehicle or potential vehicle or platform or whatever for achieving whatever you want to achieve, whether you have a policy you want to get implemented, whether you got a law you want to see get passed, whether you've got a particular like hobby horse issue you really want to see addressed, like that, the roads all go through the administration, right? So if you're like a think tank policy wonk, if you're at the Heritage Foundation and you're, or whatever, like you're at Center for Renewing America or, Stephen Miller's America First Legal, pick your like right-wing org. And like your big issue is like border enforcement, right? Like, well, now is like go time, right? Like you've been working on policy papers about what to do about the border for the last 4 years. Like now is the time to actually achieve that, right? Through the Trump administration. Same thing with like a media outlet, right? Like you are a conservative media, journalist who's working on like trans issues. And you're covering the kind of policy fight over trans issues. Like, well, hopefully the Trump administration is going to like do something significant on that stuff. And so you want contacts in the Trump administration. You want sources to kind of help explain to you, help give you scoops about what they're doing. You want like the inside scoop on what they're doing. So everything, obviously people remain independent if they're doing their job well, but everything kind of gets reoriented around like what defines the kind of rhythm of what you're doing is what's happening in the Trump administration.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. But it's God, you saw those numbers in DC of 97, what
Oh
was
yeah.
92%. I guess that's just like black people though, right? That's not like that's
Well,
just
no,
like
but also like,
blacks.
I mean, also like bureaucrat, everyone's connected. It's like, I mean, yeah, obviously like that's, the black vote in like in inner city DC, but it's also like the entire bureaucracy is lib. That's part of the problem. Right.
Right.
And that's
they're
one of
voting
the
for
other
their
insurmountable.
jobs, right?
Their
They're,
or
like,
their
voting for
jobs, or like
careers.
they're like a federal contractor where all their cash comes from the bureaucracy. Like that's the entire like DC extended universe. Everyone who works in DC is like a lobbyist or a federal contractor or a bureaucrat. Like all those guys have a vested interest in like the blob continuing to be the blob. So
a highest isn't it the highest average income in the country?
yeah,
It's
it's like
suburb.
the five counties like around DC are like the 5 wealthiest counties in America or something like that. 10 maybe.
Those bastards.
Yeah,
Those
very rich
damn
people.
Bastards.
It's your money too.
Yeah, dude. I had a meeting with a huge company, a very highly regulated company. I won't say what it is. And, I run a branding agency, and branding agencies is contracts, right? You're trying to get little bits of the marketing budget of whatever company, and these marketing budgets yearly can be $1 billion, and you're trying to just get like a little bit of it. And I was talking to probably a large percentage of the economy in marketing is locked up in these dinosaur companies, and they have some marketing firm in DC that's like somebody's aunt that they signed a turnover contract with like 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. And these people just get free money, like hundreds of millions of dollars a year, to like design their email template in Canva. They probably make, they probably work 1 hour a day, and they've just been getting these contracts, bloated, ridiculous contracts for decades, and they can't get out of them. They're like, oh yeah, we're locked into this contract for the next 5 years. And it's like, what? So that's how it works. I hope Elon gets in there and shakes up the money a little bit, because,
sorely needed. Yeah, because there's like the bloat stuff, which conservatives have been complaining about for forever. But there's also like the ideological stuff, which makes it impossible if you're like an actual right winger who wants to do right wing stuff to do right wing stuff. Like that's what Trump sort of learned the hard way the first time. It's like, you look at like donations. You can't look at like the vote, but you look at donations from the employees of like every major executive agency branch. And every single one, it's like 60, 70, 80% Democrat under Trump, right? Like when Trump was running the executive branch, I think in 2020, after 4 years of a Republican in charge of the executive branch, I think there wasn't a single agency where the employees were donating more to Republicans than to Democrats. And some of them, like DHS or whatever, is like 80-20 or something after 4 years of Trump, right? Like it's ridiculous. It's, total one party state.
That's crazy. So is he going to be able to, do the purge?
That's the question, right? I mean, if anyone is going to get the chance to, it's like right now with this guy, with this team, right? So I honestly don't know. I obviously hope he can. But they are going to have to be ruthless, because, this is a system which is inextricably tied to like every other power center in the country, right? Like Wall Street, the media, Silicon Valley, like all of these big like regime institutions have like tentacles that are tied to the federal bureaucracy. In many ways, the federal bureaucracy is like the beating heart of the entire system. So like the second he starts like just mass firing people, the media is going to have a total meltdown, right? Like, and you're going to have academia, like experts on TV every day talking about how this is going to destroy the country. And like, the second he tries to do anything serious, he's going to have serious opposition. And it's really tough to withstand. So if anyone can do it, it's him, but it's going to be really hard.
Well, again, he's got the mandate this time, hopefully,
which is
hopefully
huge.
They won't come up with some bullshit, So, okay. Well, what else? What else are you thinking about?
We covered, I think, like pretty comprehensive range of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I'm still in like the elated phase. Like I just can't get over how awesome that was. Like the entire thing. It's just, I almost feel like I'm dreaming. It's like the greatest thing that's happened since I've been in politics, which I guess isn't very long, but.
Yeah, well, I don't think we're going to get another one. I think this is pretty much it. I think things are going to be boring for a while. You know?
Yeah, I don't know how boring. If they're serious about doing serious things, I think things are going to get pretty spicy pretty quickly. But like, it's true. There's not going to be another night. Like, I'm just so grateful I got to be alive and in politics for that.
I think we're going to get boring politicians for a while. Like, we'll enter the Vance. We'll get Vance, who's, great. I love it. I really like Vance actually a lot. But we'll have DeSantis. These are going to be our next group of guys. And that'll be fine.
You can't recreate Trump. Like, there's no one else like him. Yeah.
It's funny. It's like, everybody's saying the Caesar. We're not going to get a Caesar, I don't think. I don't think we're getting Caesar. Not in our lifetimes. And I think, honestly, Trump's victory puts a pin in kind of the collapse, right? It kind of like it's like now America's gonna go on now for at least another century, probably basically as is. I mean, I'm sure there'll be wars and there'll be all kinds of stuff. I mean, unless something really crazy happens. But it's like now that you have DeSantis in there, now that I just think there's enough people who are hungry enough for power that they've gone in the door now, and I just don't think you can shut that door, really.
I hope so, man. I hope so. Obviously, I would prefer it that way because it's my country. But we'll see. I mean, I think a big part of like what the future looks like depends on what the next 4 years look like. Like, this is about as pivotal as it gets. So,
yeah. So, what job would you, if you could have any job in the administration, what would you want?
Well, like I'm a writer, so I'd probably do some kind of speechwriter role. I can't talk about it too much, but yeah, I would want to be a speechwriter role. Yeah, but I'd want to be a speechwriter role in some capacity where like what I was doing actually mattered. So,
how does speechwriting actually work? Do you, especially for somebody like Trump? I mean, like, did they say it word for word? How does it? What's the actual practice of speechwriting?
It totally depends on the principal, like who you're writing for. So like some guys will like never read a word you write, which is extraordinarily frustrating. Some guys will like read exactly what you write. And a lot of guys like, Trump is famous for going off script. But he also like would read. I mean, there were like, this is one of the many reasons like Stephen Miller is just like a brilliant, like giga genius in his own right, is like, not only was he like hardcore and incredible speechwriter, but he figured out how to write like specifically for Trump and Trump's like idiom and voice, which is extremely hard to do. Like, how do you write for a guy who's like known for going off script a lot, right? And I don't know, I haven't seen like the drafts of the speech he wrote, but you could tell like Trump's most famous speeches and like his best speeches were like Miller. Like his RNC speech in 2015 or in 2016, his inauguration speech, his like forgotten man, forgotten no more speech, like that was all textbook Miller. And with the way Trump would speak, it would be like in paragraphs, and then he would go off script, and then like a paragraph, and then he'd go off script, right? And you could tell when he went off script, and you could tell when he went back on script. You can, because he would is the way his voice would change, right? And like so he'd have these like, so the paragraphs that were like written for him by Miller or whoever, like they would set it up perfectly for like the riff, and that was remarkable. So
I've noticed that exact pattern with him, that he'll hit a topic, he'll kind of say inspiring stuff, and then he'll be like, and what's the deal with you?
Exactly.
Like Seinfeld mode, for like a little riff, and then he goes back. That's totally what he does. Oh, that's interesting. And so Stephen Miller's the guy writing all those.
So he's got other speechwriters who are great too. But I'm just from my perspective, at least, like Trump's most iconic speeches, like the ones that really like define Trumpism, the Trump era, et cetera, which are like, his RNC speech in 2016, his inauguration speech, the speech he did in October 2016, which I still think is his best speech ever, right after the Access Hollywood tape dropped. Like the Access Hollywood tape dropped. It was October 2016. Everyone is like, he's done, right? Like Paul Ryan pulled the plug. I think Paul Ryan like pulled his endorsement or something. I can't remember the specifics, but like the entire GOP had like abandoned him. Everyone was like, it's over, it's done. And he gave the hardest speech of like any politician, at least in my lifetime, maybe much longer, where he was just like fuck all of them. Like, they're all against me. I'm the only one who's speaking for you. They'll do anything. They'll lie about you. They'll smear you. They'll try to destroy you because our campaign represents an existential threat to like the entire global system. And like DC is like the imperial city. It's like the heartland. It's the heart of like the entire system, pushing like radical globalism across the entire West. Like, it was this extraordinarily right-wing, like hardcore speech that was just defiant. And that was like one of the speeches where the more than I think like almost any other speech, he was like reading a script. Like, he wasn't going off script very much at all. Like, you could tell he was reading something that had been written for him. I don't know for sure that was Miller, but I'm pretty sure it was, given what he was saying.
Wow. That's great that you remember that. That's really cool. I would have never remembered, but yeah,
I'll send you the clip.
What a time.
It's a remarkable speech. It's an amazing speech.
So this is after Grab Him by the Pussy, October.
It was the first speech he gave.
October 2016.
It was the first speech he gave. It was down in Florida. They dropped it, and like everyone was like, "What's he gonna say?" Right? Yeah. And he released, I think, like a pithy statement, like "I wish it was locker room talk" or whatever. But then he gives this big speech, and he's like, it's just like fire. It's like
so cool.
The only people powerful enough to stop them are you, the American people. Like, it was just pure, like, thumos. It was amazing.
Man, they really thought they had that locked up.
They did.
I found the most interesting Trump artifact recently. He has a book, I think from 2008 that I just started listening to called, it's not The Art of the Deal, obviously, but it's like the way to win or something. Let me see. It's like not how to get rich. It's think like a billionaire or something. I can't remember which one this is. It's like right from 2008. But somebody sent it to me to like just read because he liked it. And the craziest thing is it's written right at the beginning of Obama. And the first chapter is him like talking about how great Obama is. Mm-hmm. It's so weird. And it's like clearly he's trying to throw a bone to Obama. And he's like, Obama's amazing. Obama's amazing. And then it's like 2 years later, he hated Obama. And was it just because he got made fun of by Obama? Like, at one time?
People joke like Obama's responsible for Trump because maybe if he hadn't roasted him, like, he never would have run. I don't know if that's true or not, but it would be pretty funny if it was.
So it's think like a champion. That's what it is. So and it's also funny because all his enemies later, he's like liking in this book. Like he talks about Deborah Messing. It's so weird. It's such a like point in time that like nobody knows about. What did Obama exactly do? What was that he roasted?
Now that I say it, I can't remember the specifics, but there's like a clip of Obama, because Trump by sort of second term Obama, which is when Obama was like really unhinged as well. Like Trump had like emerged as like a pretty a prominent vocal like right-wing personality, right-wing critic of Obama. And there was some like bougie dinner that they went to together, right? And Obama was giving the speech, and like Trump's in the crowd, and Obama makes this like derisive joke about Trump. And there's this like clip of Trump being like, the camera pans to Trump and Trump's like pissed. And then he ran for president and he won. So
that's so funny. Yeah, somebody was just sharing that. All right, dude. Well, hey, victory dance. We got it. We did it. I don't really know what to do now. I mean, I hope that, some of this money can break off into the branding world. That's what I'm hoping. But, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. It's going to be very cool. But yeah, I think it's going to be a great decade. It's like the 80s too, as somebody said.
I hope so.
All right, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining. I'll post this on Substack as well, and it'll just be on all the platforms just as a podcast, but appreciate it. And I'll see you soon, man.
Thanks, man. It was a lot of fun.
Peace.